We are now going to look at process costing. And we are going to learn about the kinds of companies that can use process costing, which includes not only manufacturers, but also companies that provide services. We're going to see how it is similar to job costing, but it is also different than job costing. We're going to see how the flow is actually the same and the journal entries are quite similar, but how we go about calculating our cost and how we calculate our cost per unit is going to be a little bit different because we have got to calculate something called equivalent units. And for many of you, this is the most challenging part of learning how to do process costing. Now, we are going to cover the weighted average method in this particular course. However, I want you to know that there is another method that is also utilized, and it is the FIFO, or first in, first out method. Therefore, I would recommend you all, if you go to work at a place and you find out that they use the FIFO method, then you need to look into it further. Reason number 5010 that you need to hang on to this particular textbook. If you are considering a career in accounting, in regards to manufacturing in particular, you may want to look into the CMA exam, which will cover process costing as well as job costing. But I would also want to recommend to you that you take our advanced managerial class as one of your electives. I'd also like to mention that this time, if you happen to be a business major or an entrepreneurship major, even HR or marketing, and you believe that you are going to end up at a company that manufactures, I highly recommend to you that you buck it up and take some additional accounting classes as your electives. And I want to specifically mention the cost accounting class and the advanced managerial class. You will learn so much information that you will be able to utilize in your future career. It could be a little bit painful because it's more accounting for you. However, as I have mentioned in the past, it is all about the numbers. And the more you understand how the numbers come to be, the farther you will go in your career. We're going to learn how to use this equivalent units calculation to help us figure out what our costs are for production, and we are actually going to learn how to produce a production cost report, and we'll talk briefly about how we can utilize that production cost report to help us to evaluate and monitor our particular processes by departments, if you will. All right, so take really good notes on this particular set of videos. I can assure you that your homework will be complicated, and I did assign numerous problems for you because I know that practice makes perfect, especially in regards to this chapter due to the calculations and how challenging they are for some of you. All right, so process costing, it is similar to our job costing that we have already taken a look at, but process costing is applied whenever we manufacture or produce products that are very, very similar, if not identical. Examples include the production of cereal, paint, manufacturing of steel, oil refining, and soft drinks. And we actually have several companies here in Chattanooga that actually go about using process costing. So here we've got some examples, all right? So we've got soft drink manufacturers in Chattanooga. If you guys drive over on Amnicola Highway, We have got Coca-Cola Bottling Company. We've got PepsiCo. We have got Double Cola. Some other companies that you guys may be aware of within the state of Tennessee that manufacture and use process costing. What about Jack Daniels? They are going to be processing and producing a lot of bottles of Jack, right? What about oil? You guys have heard of these companies, ExxonMobil and Royal Dutch. What about computer chip manufacturers, Intel, Advanced Micro Devices? And then lastly down here we've got some chemical producers mentioned. Dow Chemical and DuPont, both of these have locations nearby. We also have BASF over on Amicola. All right, so they are producing products or items or voluminous materials that are identical. All right, so they are homogeneous items. Where we saw that in the job order cost system, we would have products that may be similar, but they're not exactly the same. They would have some attributes of putting them together, whether it be the materials and or the time and the skills necessary to actually make them or provide them if it's a service. And we needed to keep up with those individual jobs on a per job or per item basis. Okay, so there are differences, and you're going to see that the process costing have some things that are similar, but then we've got some things that are different than how we dealt with job costing. So I did mention earlier that we could use process costing even if we're a service company. All right, so service companies that provide specific non-routine services could benefit from using a job order cost system. So let me give you some examples. What if we were a law firm and each case that we handle is different? We're going to use different quantities of paper. We are going to use different levels of expertise of lawyers with experience in the firm. We are going to use so many hours of interns and so much in research. Okay, so we would keep up with all of those costs on a job cost system. What about a CPA firm? We could apply the same thing. Okay, because large accounting firms have different kinds of clients, and those clients have abundance of needs, different kinds of needs. Some of their tax returns can be exceptionally complicated. They could have multiple entities within each one of those tax returns that's having to be combined and be taken care of. All right, so job order cost system. What if, however, we were talking about H&R Block, who just processes a gazillion tax returns, and those tax returns are general in nature. A lot of 1040s, a whole lot of 1040s, way more 1040s than that specialized firm that maybe handles only certain kinds of complicated tax items. Okay, so H&R Block could apply this process costing. What about a place that changes the oil in cars? You guys have seen them, Quick Lube and whatever some of those other ones' names are. Those kinds of places could use a process costing system. They could track their costs for a period of time, figure out how many oil changes they did, and use that information to evaluate their efficiencies and their costs, etc. All right, so we can see that with the job order cost system, like we have seen before, we tracked the cost, and those costs were assigned to each job, and then when each job was finished, we knew the cost to do that particular job. Each one of those jobs had its own unique characteristics. All right, so we saw an example of a problem where it was a company that produced or provided the service of building decks or patios, if you will, for homes. And each one of those could be different. It could have different kinds of material. One could be brick, one could be stone, one could be stamped concrete, one could be wood. The sizes of those were different. Okay, so the amount of work that would go into them, the amount of materials that would go into them were all different. They were the same kind of product, but they were unique in and of themselves. So that's why we use the job order costing system. But with process costing, we've got a lot of items that are homogeneous or uniform in nature. Okay, so imagine, if you will, the Bic pen company. They are popping those pens out of that assembly line fast and furious, and those pens are all the same. They're uniform. They may have a huge run of black pens, and then they can do a huge run of red pens, and they can do a huge run of blue pens. All right, they're homogeneous in nature, but it might have some ink differences or the color of the barrel. But for the most part, we're talking the items are the same. All right, so the cost can be tracked through a series of connected manufacturing processes or departments. So imagine those pens, if you will. The ink has to be put in to the insert. And then the insert has to be inserted into the barrel. And then the barrel has to have the tip and the head of it put on it. Okay? Each one of those distinct things is a process, and we can literally track the cost if those things are done in different departments. So here is an illustration showing us that, in a way, the systems are the same. We are still going to track direct materials and direct labor, and we're even going to allocate or assign manufacturing overhead into the cost of producing the items or the services, whichever it may be. Now, I do want you to notice down here on the process cost flow that many times in some manufacturing or service organizations, we're going to have different departments, and these departments do different activities, and we can track their cost of materials, we can track their cost of labor, and we can track even how much of manufacturing overhead that gets assigned or allocated into those. All right, so we can have more than one WIP account when we have process costing. All right, so direct materials and direct labor, those items can be dropped into each individual department. Maybe we need some ink and we need so many hours of labor worked here, but then in the next one we need some barrels and we need so many hours of labor here in my big pen example. All right, so we would track those in these individual departments, and we're going to see how we produce this cost report for those items. Manufacturing overhead, again, would still be assigned or allocated into those WIP accounts, and we will see that going forward. Now, we know that once items are finished, they are no longer quote-unquote work in process inventory because they are finished. They are 100% completed or 100% converted into a finished product or a finished service, if you will. Therefore, we know that that needs to be turned into finished goods inventory, and of course, sooner or later will be expensed out as cost of goods sold. That finished goods inventory applies to those items that are products, where the services is going to show up as part of our expenses. All right, so we've seen that there are similarities. The manufacturing cost elements are going to be the same. Direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead are all going to be accounted for. We will accumulate the cost of those materials, the labor, and the overhead, and we will make sure it's tracked. And the flow of cost is quite similar, but we do have some differences. We have seen that the number of WIP, or work in process accounts, is going to be different. Under process costing, we can have more than one WIP. Many times there are multiple work in process accounts. All right, we're going to attempt to keep this process costing very, very simple for you in this class, but I will highlight occasionally as we proceed that it can be way more complicated in real life. There are, of course, documents that will be used to track cost. Under process costing, there are no such thing as job cost sheets, but there are other ways that we track the cost of production. In regards to the point at which costs are actually totaled up in dollar amount, when we have the job cost system, we totaled up the cost of the job when the jobs were completed. But under process costing, we are going to total up cost at the end of each period. And then we're going to look and see how many units were finished during the period. And then our unit cost computations, this is where it varies quite a bit, and we are going to have to learn how to deal with something called equivalent units. And this is going to be the most challenging aspect for you. Equivalent units are necessary because not all of the units that we worked on during a period are always 100% of the way completed during the period. So we have to do this thing called equivalent units. So imagine, if you will, the Bic pen example. We've put 1 million black pens into work in process during the month, and we're at the last date of the month. All 1 million of those will not have been completed 100% of the way. They still need something done to them. All right, taking into consideration that, we're going to learn how to calculate the equivalent units, and I'll show you some examples of that here in another video. All right, so job order cost system, one work in process account. We definitely used job cost sheets for each particular job. It kept up with its own DM, direct materials, DL, direct labor, and MOH, or manufacturing overhead. And we could calculate the cost of each job based on the information contained there. If our particular job had 10 units of the same thing, for example, maybe we're making dump trucks and we had an order for 10 special dump trucks. We could take the total cost of all 10 of those and divide it by 10 to come up with a price or cost per unit. Under the process cost system, we know that we could have multiple departments. Therefore, we can have multiple work in process accounts because different materials and different amounts of labor are going to be necessary in those different departments. And we're going to learn that we're going to be able to produce production cost reports for each one of those departments, and that we're going to do this each period. And we can still come up with a unit cost computation, and we're going to take the total manufacturing cost, but we're going to divide it by this equivalent units produced during the period. And this right here is the part that you guys are going to have to make darn sure that you understand on your homework so that you can perform those calculations on the test. So here's our processed cost flow diagrammed out, and we will come back to this here in the next video.